Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's Discourses. We're still in Book 2. Today we're looking at Chapter 27. For prudent princes and republics, it should be enough to conquer. For most often, when it's not, one loses. Now, this is about the question, continuing from the point he raised about, mocking or attacking. Here it says, using words of little honor against an enemy arises often from insolence of either victory or false hope of victory gives you. In other words, this idea that it's gonna be easy to take this guy on. Yeah, it's gonna be easy. They were cowards, or they were weak. Or in other words, just giving the enemy not the honor they deserve. This is kind of an error here. This false hope makes men err not only in speaking but also in working. Okay, say. So it's not only about how they speak to people, but also how they're working, how they act. For when this hope enters into the breasts of men, it makes them pass beyond the mark, and most often lose the opportunity of having certain good through hoping to have something uncertain and uncertain better. In other words, they go beyond what they should do, the mark. They don't do the right thing because of this. They think they're going to get something better, an uncertain better. They lose the opportunity of the good, of the certain good, for some uncertain better. Because this is a limit that deserves consideration, it's very important, he says, since men are often deceived about it, to the harm of their state, it seems to me that it should be demonstrated through particulars, with ancient and modern examples, since it cannot be demonstrated so distinctly through reason. In other words, because this is very important, and because we just can't, it can't be addressed simply through reason. I need examples, and he's going to give you examples both ancient and modern. After Hannibal had defeated the Romans at Cannae, he sent a spokesman to the Carthage to announce the victory and request their assistance. Right now, if we move over here, Livy 8, 20. No, sorry, not 28. I'll burn my eyes. Livy 23, 11 through 13. But what had done was disputed in the Senate there. Hanno, an old and prudent Carthaginian citizen, counseled that this victory should be used wisely to make peace with the Romans, since they, having won, could have it with honorable conditions, and one should not wait to make one after a loss. In other words, Hanno says, well, Hannibal won, it's been great, we should make a peace offer now. We have the advantage. And not wait later when we've lost. For the intentions of the Carthaginians should have been to show the Romans that they were able enough to combat them, and having had the victory over them, one should not seek to lose it through hope of something greater. Now this policy was not taken up, but it was well known by the Carthaginian Senate to have been wise later when that opportunity was lost. In other words, you had an opportunity, you could have done something, but it would have been, in other words, later when they, oh no, we want more, we want all Rome, right? Well, Alexander the Great had already taken all the East. The Republic of Tyre, which was noble and powerful in those times through having their city in water like the Venetians, having seen the greatness of Alexander, sent him a spokesman to say that they wished to be his good servants and to give him the obedience he wished, but that they were not ready to accept either him or his troops into the town. Right? Quintus Curtius 4, Okay, this example of this, right? He says, whereupon indignant that his city wished to close to him the gates that all the world had opened up to him, Alexander repelled them, did not accept their conditions, and camped there. The town was in water and was well supplied with provisions, and other supplied necessities in its defense. So much so that after 4 months, Alexander perceived that the city was taking him more time to its glory than many other acquisitions had taken him, and decided to try for an accord and concede them what they themselves have asked. But those of Tyre had been made proud, and not only did not wish to accept the accord, but killed those who came to put it into practice. Indignant at this, Alexander set himself to capture with so much force that he took it, demolished it, and killed and made slaves of the men. So in other words, example, at first he said no, but then he did it, and then it's okay. In other words, there was opportunity here. He respected them, but then they said no, because they're going to, we defeat him. We've held him back. We can keep on. We can win him, defeat against him. I call this this is kind of like the Zelensky problem, right? Achieve so much, and at the same time, maybe you should make peace or accept something. But I think that's also the problem but let's be careful here. I think the opposite problem is also Putin, is that Putin has wasted so much, and now he's kind of sunk cost problem, right? He can't accept the peace that gives him something. He wants all, he's paid too much for this, right? So let's go next thing. He goes, 3. In 1512, the Spanish army came into Florence, into the Florentine dominion, to put down the Medici back in Florence, and tax the city, brought by citizens from inside, who had given them hope that once they were in the Florentine dominion, they would take arms in their favor. Having entered into the plains and not discovering anyone, and having a lack of provisions, they tried for an accord, which the people of Florence, having become proud, did not accept, whence arose the loss of Prato and the ruin of their state. In other words, again, this is his example here, that the Florentine Republic, of which Perdidos Sofreni was going for life, and Machiavelli was the secretary of the chancellor. This is that regime that was lost in that sense. That they got prideful. They should have made a deal with them. They should have made a deal with the Spanish. But having entered into the plain, discovering not anyone, and lacking, and having like him, they tried an accord. But then the people of Florence, becoming proud, did not accept the accord, and they continued the battle, and they lost against them. Therefore, princes who are assaulted cannot make a greater error when the assault is made by men very much more powerful than they, than to refuse every accord, especially when it's offered to them. In other words, when princes who are assaulted cannot make in other words, if you're assaulted by someone who are much more powerful than then they refuse every accord that's offered, right? For one will never be offered so base that there is not inside in it some part the well-being of him who accepts it, and there will be a part of victory for him. In other words, I'm more powerful than you. I attack you, but you've held me off. And if I offer you the peace, an accord, a deal, you shouldn't be so proud to think that, I've held them off so much. In other words, I've held them off so much, I shouldn't do this. No. At a certain time, even this deal is going to be even though it's He says, it's not going to be, the offer is not going to be so base that there's no interest in this. Well, in other words, some part of well-being for him who accepts it. For it should have been enough for the people of Tyre that Alexander accepted his conditions he had refused before, and their victory was enough when, with arms in hand, they had made such a man condescend to their wish. It should have been enough for the Florentine people, and have been victory enough for them if the Spanish army yielded to some of their wishes and did not fulfill all of their own. In other words, yeah, exactly. Two examples. If it would have been better that the people of Tyre, okay, they're giving you this is what you wish. He said no. Now he's saying yes. And likewise, you have gotten some of your wishes rather than fulfilled all of their own. For the intention of that army was to change the state in Florence, to remove it from the devotion to France, and to draw money from it, right? To change the state in Florence, remove. If of these three things, it had two of them, which is the last two, and remained to the people, which was the preservation of the state. Each had in that some honor and some satisfaction. In other words, you could have saved the state. You give them the money, and I'm not helping France anymore. In other words, the Spanish had three goals. They were going to make an accord. Okay, make an accord with what? Okay, we'll let you give you some money, and we'll not support France anymore. Okay. You keep your stay. You have some good. Each has some honor and some satisfaction. Nor should the people have cared about the two things since it remained alive. Nor should it have wished to put that, even if it had a greater and almost certain victory, in any part of discretion of fortune, whereby going to the last stake, which nobody prudent ever risks unless necessary. You don't go to the last stake. In other words, you don't put everything in unless you're forced to. You don't gamble everything. In other words, war is fortune. Certain fortune. There's this chance in battle. Accidents happen. Things you can't control. And because of that, it would be going to the last stake. He says, throwing everything in. That is a bad policy. Nor should the people have cared about the two since it remained alive. He says, and therefore it's always, and that even if there was a chance of this, throwing everything in there was not a good idea. When Hannah, now he goes, he starts with, he gives his example first of the. In this chapter, he started with the Tyre, ancient, then modern. Now he's going with the example from ancient again. When Hannibal departed from Italy, where for 16 years he had been glorious, called back by the Carthaginians to relieve his fatherland, he found Hasbrodel and Saprax defeated, and found the kingdom of Nudimia lost and Carthage restricted to the limits of its walls, with no refuge remaining to it other than him and his army. Right? Livy 30, 19 to 20, 19 to 20, and 29 to 31. Right? He's going back. Why? Because the Carthaginians are screwed. That he's going to relieve the fatherland. We got there, it was lost, right? Knowing that this was the last stake of his fatherland, he did not wish to put at risk. He did not wish to put at risk before he had tried every other remedy. He was not ashamed to ask for peace, since he judged that if his fatherland had already had any remedy, it was in that and not in war. And when that was denied him, he did not wish to fail to engage in combat, even if he should lose, since he judged that he was still able to win, or lose gloriously. And if Hannibal, who was so virtuous, and his army intact, sought peace before fighting, when he saw that by losing it, his fatherland would become servile, what should another do of less virtue and of less experience than he? In other words, in other words, this is the example what he did. He came back. He says, well, everything's lost. I have to do certain things. I have to either make peace, but in other words, his virtue sought peace before fighting, so that by losing it, his fatherland would become servile. Right, losing his army with that. What should another do in that sense? But men make this error who do not know how to put limits to their hopes. And by founding themselves on these without without otherwise measuring themselves, they are ruined. In other words, he's saying, the problem here is people, in other words, they don't base their judgments or decisions on reality. They base their judgments on hopes. And they put a limit to their hopes. They don't know how to put a limit on their hopes. And because they don't know how to limit their hopes, they found themselves on them without the means of achieving them. In other words, measuring themselves properly. Can I achieve those hopes or not? Okay, so this is where we end up things. We end here. He says that this is the lesson today, so we'll stop. Next time we'll look at the next chapter. What else to do? Okay, if you like it, hit the like button. If you didn't like it, you can say no. Put a comment on here why you didn't like it. Also, please, if you have a question or comment, please, I forgot this part because I was interrupted. This is what happens. Something interrupts you. I stopped the video for a second because of that. Please put your comments or questions, and I will answer them when I do it. Like it, didn't like it, but explain why. Another thing you do is, if you've not subscribed, subscribe. Encourage others to subscribe. And otherwise, if you liked it, share it. Share it in your social media, share it with your friends, share it far and wide. Liking, commenting, liking, sharing, subscribing, all of these things increase the algorithm and help the channel grow and do things. And it's going to need to grow as things happen. Another thing you do is you can want to follow me on social media. The social media links below. If you want to know more about me as an academic and scholar, you can check the academic social media links. But below those, you can check out my reviews. You can check out the social media, academic social media, see my scholarship and things like that. And the other thing you do is you want to help me to do what I do. You can do it through Patreon or Subscribestar. And I don't know what to do. You can. Another thing you can do is you can buy one of my books. In that sense, if they're listed below, the books are currently available. They're listed below. If you want to help. You can do so through your, of course, local bookstore, but of course through an online distributor like Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Book Depository, Libris, and so forth like those, or order it directly through the publisher. Well, that's it. We'll see you again next time. We look at the next chapter. Take care. Bye-bye.